The rain tapped against the windows of our open-concept office in downtown Seattle, creating a soothing background rhythm as I reviewed the final slides for my presentation. It was a dreary Wednesday morning in September, but inside I felt a flutter of excitement. After 3 months of research and countless late nights, I was finally ready to present my market expansion strategy to the entire team. I'm Rebecca Chen, a senior marketing strategist at Horizon Tech, a fast-growing software company that had recently secured its Series B funding. I'd been with the company for just over 2 years, joining shortly after completing my MBA. While I loved my job, the past 6 months had been increasingly challenging since Martin Baker took over as our new marketing director. "Are those the slides for today's meeting?" Martin's voice came from behind me, making me jump slightly. "Yes," I replied, turning to face him. "I've incorporated all the feedback from last week's review." Martin leaned over my shoulder, scrolling through my presentation without asking. His cologne was overpowering, and I resisted the urge to step back. "This approach is too aggressive," he said, pointing to my revenue projections. "And I'm not seeing the competitive analysis I asked for." "It's on slide 12, I responded, keeping my voice steady despite the frustration building in my chest. "And the projections are based on the data from our pilot program in Denver. We exceeded those numbers by 15%. Martin straightened up, adjusting his tailored navy suit. "Just tone it down, Rebecca. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And be prepared for questions. The executive team won't be as easily impressed as your direct reports." Before I could respond, he walked away, stopping to chat with Jake from the sales team. I took a deep breath and turned back to my computer. This wasn't the first time Martin had undermined my work, and I had a feeling it wouldn't be the last. 2 hours later, our team gathered in the main conference room. I stood at the front, waiting for the last few stragglers to take their seats. Martin sat directly across from me, his expression unreadable as he typed something on his phone. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice clear and confident despite the nervous energy coursing through me. "Today, I'll be presenting our East Coast expansion strategy, focusing on 3 key metropolitan areas: Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through my research, analysis, and recommendations. The team seemed engaged, nodding along and taking notes. Even our CEO, Diana Wright, looked impressed, which gave me a boost of confidence. And based on our success in similar markets, I project we can achieve a 30% market share within 18 months, generating approximately $4.2 million in additional annual revenue, I concluded, showing my final slide with the financial projections. "Thank you, Rebecca," Diana said with a nod. "This is thorough work. Does anyone have questions before we open it up for discussion?" Martin cleared his throat. "I have some concerns about these projections," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "They seem overly optimistic given the competitive landscape in these markets, especially in New York, where we'll be going up against established players like DataSphere and TechVantage." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but kept my expression neutral. "I've accounted for the competition in my analysis," I replied. "If you look at slide 12, "I've seen the slide," Martin interrupted. "But I think we need to be more realistic. The executive team needs solid numbers they can take to the board, not wishful thinking." The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes shifting between Martin and me, waiting to see how I would respond. Diana was watching closely, her expression thoughtful. "These aren't wishful numbers," I said firmly. "They're based on our performance in similar markets, adjusted for the specific challenges we'll face on the East Coast. I've also built in contingencies for potential setbacks." Martin shook his head slightly. "I think we should revisit these projections before making any decisions. Perhaps Rebecca can work with Jake from sales to get a more grounded perspective." The implication was clear. My work wasn't reliable enough on its own. I needed supervision from someone else, preferably a man. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "I actually think Rebecca's analysis is quite sound," came a voice from the end of the table. It was Alex Chen, no relation to me, our chief technology officer. The methodology mirrors what we used for our West Coast expansion, which has exceeded expectations. I shot Alex a grateful look as Martin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, we can certainly discuss the details further, Martin conceded, though his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. Let's move on to implementation timelines. The rest of the meeting continued without incident, but the damage was done. As we filed out of the conference room, I could hear whispers among my colleagues. Some were defending my work, others wondering if Martin's concerns were valid. It was exactly what he wanted, to plant seeds of doubt about my competence. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on my upcoming tasks, but Martin's words kept echoing in my mind. Was this just his management style, or was there something more personal at play? It wasn't the first time he'd questioned my judgment in front of others, but it was the most direct challenge yet. My phone buzzed with a text from Priya, my closest friend at the company who worked in product development. Drinks after work? Sounds like you could use one. I smiled despite my frustration. Absolutely. The usual place at 6? See you there? Came the quick reply. As the afternoon wore on, I threw myself into my work, determined not to let Martin's behavior affect my performance. But deep down, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep working in an environment where my manager actively undermined me. The question was, what was I going to do about it? He did it again, I said, sliding into the booth across from Priya at the Emerald, our favorite bar a few blocks from the office. The warm lighting and soft jazz music created a cozy atmosphere that contrasted with the persistent rain outside. Priya pushed a glass of Cabernet toward me. I heard. Half the office is talking about it. I groaned, taking a long sip of wine. Great. That's exactly what I needed. If it makes you feel any better, most people are on your side, Priya said, leaning forward. Martin's reputation isn't exactly stellar. You're not the first person he's tried to diminish. I know, but I'm definitely his favorite target. I ran my finger around the rim of my glass. I've been keeping track. In the last 3 months, he's publicly questioned my work 11 times. 11, Priya. And he's reassigned 2 of my projects to Ryan, who's been here half as long as I have. Have you talked to HR? I shook my head. And say what? That my boss is mean to me? He's careful about how he does it. It's always framed as concerns or feedback. There's nothing concrete enough to constitute harassment. What about Diana? She seemed impressed with your presentation. Maybe, I conceded, thinking back to our CEO's thoughtful expression during the meeting. But going over Martin's head could make things worse if it doesn't work out. Priya nodded, understanding the delicate office politics at play. So, what's your plan? Keep doing excellent work and hope someone important notices? I offered with a weak smile. That's not a plan, Becca. That's wishful thinking. She was right, of course. As we ordered a plate of truffle fries to share, I thought about my options. I could start looking for another job, but I genuinely loved Horizon Tech. The company's mission to make enterprise software more accessible for small businesses aligned perfectly with my values, and most of my colleagues were fantastic. Why should I be the one to leave? I need to be more strategic, I said finally. Document everything. Build allies. And find opportunities to showcase my work where Martin can't interfere. Now that sounds more like the Rebecca Chen I know, Priya said, with an approving nod. Speaking of opportunities, did you hear about the Forbes interview? I frowned, confused. What interview? James Evans is doing an interview with Forbes next week. Something about visionary founders under 40. The whole thing is going to be filmed at our office. James Evans was Horizon Tech's founder and chairman. Though he'd stepped back from day-to-day operations to let Diana run the company, he was still the face of Horizon and a respected figure in the tech industry. Interesting, I said, not immediately seeing how this related to my situation. They're going to feature some of our projects, including the East Coast expansion, Priya continued, a mischievous glint in her eye. Diana mentioned it in the product meeting this afternoon. Apparently, they want to showcase our growth strategy. Now I understood why Priya was telling me this. So my work will be featured in the interview? Potentially. But guess who's been asked to brief James on the expansion plan? Martin, I said flatly. Bingo. Priya popped a fry into her mouth. Which means he'll probably take credit for your strategy. The injustice of it made my stomach turn. The East Coast expansion was my project from the beginning. I'd spent countless hours researching markets, analyzing competitors, and developing our approach. And now Martin would present it as his own work to our founder and a national publication. That's not happening, I said with sudden determination. I need to make sure James knows whose strategy it really is. Now you're talking, Priya grinned. But how are you going to do that without stepping on Martin's toes? That was the question. Direct confrontation wasn't my style, and it could easily backfire. I needed to be smarter about this. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But I have a week to figure it out. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The rain had finally stopped, and the rising sun cast a golden glow over the Seattle skyline visible from our office windows. I wanted to review the complete market analysis before the team's daily stand-up meeting. I was surprised to find Diana already in the kitchen, making a cup of tea. "Good morning, Rebecca," she said with a warm smile. "You're here early." "So are you," I replied, returning her smile as I reached for a mug. "I wanted to get ahead on some work." Diana nodded approvingly. "I was impressed with your presentation yesterday. It's clear you put a lot of thought into the strategy." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her comment. "That means a lot." She leaned against the counter while her tea steeped. "I sensed some tension between you and Martin during the meeting." I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Diana was the CEO, but Martin reported directly to her. I didn't want to come across as complaining about my boss. "We have different approaches sometimes," I said diplomatically. "But we both want what's best for the company." Diana studied me for a moment, her keen eyes missing nothing. Different perspectives can be valuable, as long as there's mutual respect. The emphasis on mutual respect wasn't lost on me. Did she already suspect that Martin's behavior went beyond professional disagreement? "I agree," I said carefully. "And I'm always open to constructive feedback. I just prefer to receive it privately rather than in front of the entire team." Diana nodded slowly. "That's reasonable. Good leaders build up their team members, not tear them down." She picked up her tea. "By the way, have you heard about the Forbes interview with James next week?" "Priya mentioned it yesterday," I confirmed. "Your East Coast strategy will be featured," Diana said. "It's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want to highlight." My heart skipped a beat. "That's great to hear." "James will need a thorough briefing on the details," she continued. "I know Martin is scheduled to meet with him, but given that this is your project, I think you should be part of that conversation." This was the opportunity I needed, handed to me on a silver platter. "I'd be happy to brief James," I said, trying to contain my excitement. "Good. I'll let Martin know you'll be joining the meeting." With that, Diana picked up her tea and headed toward her office, leaving me standing in the kitchen with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Martin was predictably unhappy about me joining the briefing with James, but with Diana's directive, he couldn't exclude me. Instead, he insisted on reviewing all my materials beforehand and scheduled a prep session that felt more like an interrogation. "Remember, we need to present a unified front," he said during our prep meeting, his tone making it clear who he thought should be doing the talking. "James doesn't need to hear every detail of the analysis. Just the highlights and the bottom line." "Of course," I agreed, keeping my expression neutral. "But I think he'll appreciate understanding the methodology behind our projections, especially since that's what you expressed concerns about in the team meeting." Martin's eyes narrowed slightly at the reminder. "Just follow my lead during the briefing, Rebecca. I know how James thinks." The day of the briefing arrived, and I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence without being flashy. As I rode the elevator up to our office, I mentally rehearsed the key points I wanted to make sure James understood. James Evans had founded Horizon Tech in his garage 8 years ago, building the initial product himself while working as a consultant. His vision and technical brilliance had transformed the company from a one-man operation to a 200-person organization valued at over $300 million. Though he wasn't involved in daily operations anymore, his approval still carried enormous weight. The briefing was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room. I arrived 10 minutes early, materials in hand, only to find Martin already there, engaged in casual conversation with James. "Ah, here she is," Martin said as I entered, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "James, you remember Rebecca Chen, one of our marketing strategists." "Of course," James said, standing to shake my hand. He was younger than most people expected, just under 40, with an approachable demeanor that put people at ease. "Diana tells me you're the brains behind our East Coast strategy." Martin's smile faltered slightly at James's words. "Rebecca has been an important part of the team effort," he said smoothly. "We've all contributed to refining the approach." And so it began. For the next 45 minutes, I watched as Martin presented my strategy as a collaborative effort that he had guided to completion. He acknowledged my contribution to the research phase, but positioned himself as the strategic mind behind the approach. I waited patiently, contributing when asked, but biding my time. James was engaged and asked thoughtful questions, many of which Martin struggled to answer in detail. Each time, I would step in with the specific data or reasoning, earning appreciative nods from James. Finally, when Martin finished his overview, James turned to me directly. "Diana mentioned you had some innovative ideas about penetrating the Boston market specifically. I'd love to hear more about that." This was my moment. "Actually, I've prepared a brief addendum that addresses exactly that," I said, distributing copies of a document I'd prepared. "Boston presents some unique challenges and opportunities because of its concentration of educational institutions and biotech companies." For the next 15 minutes, I walked James through my specific strategy for Boston, showcasing my understanding of the market and the thought process behind my recommendations. Martin sat silently, unable to interject since this material went beyond what we had reviewed together. James was clearly impressed. "This is exactly the kind of detailed thinking we need," he said when I finished. "Have you considered how we might apply this approach to other education-heavy markets?" "I have some preliminary thoughts on that," I replied, seizing the opportunity to demonstrate the breadth of my strategic thinking. "I'd be happy to develop them further if you're interested." "Definitely," James said with enthusiasm. "This is the sort of innovation that sets Horizon apart. Make sure this makes it into the materials for the Forbes interview." Martin, who had been growing increasingly tense beside me, finally spoke up. "We'll need to be careful about what we share publicly, of course. Some of this is quite proprietary." "Naturally," James agreed. "But Rebecca's approach is something we should be proud to showcase. It demonstrates that we're not just expanding geographically. We're developing market-specific strategies that give us a competitive edge." As the meeting wrapped up, James shook my hand again. "Excellent work, Rebecca. I look forward to seeing how the implementation unfolds." Walking back to my desk afterward, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction at having my work recognized, anxiety about Martin's reaction, and hope that perhaps this recognition might change the dynamic between us. That hope was short-lived. The next morning, I received an email from Martin asking me to transfer all my East Coast expansion materials to him to ensure consistency in our external communications. The message was clear. He was taking control of the project for the Forbes interview. It seemed that even with James's praise, Martin wasn't going to change his approach. If anything, he now saw me as more of a threat. As I stared at his email, I realized this situation was reaching a breaking point. Something had to give, and I was determined it wouldn't be me. The day of the Forbes interview arrived with a flurry of activity around the office. A small film crew had set up in our main conference room, transforming the space with professional lighting and sound equipment. James arrived early, dressed in his signature casual but polished style, dark jeans, a crisp button-down shirt, and a well-tailored blazer. I kept my distance, focusing on my work while occasionally glancing toward the conference room. According to the schedule Priya had surreptitiously shared with me, James would be interviewed for about an hour, followed by a tour of the office and brief conversations with key team members about our major initiatives. Martin had made sure he would be the one discussing the East Coast expansion. Around 11 a.m., Diana stopped by my desk. "Rebecca, do you have a moment?" "Of course," I replied, immediately saving my work and standing up. "We've had a slight change of plans with the Forbes interview," she said, keeping her voice low. "James specifically requested that you join the segment on market expansion. Can you be ready in about an hour?" My heart raced. "Absolutely. Should I prepare anything specific?" "Just be yourself and be ready to discuss your strategy," Diana said with a small smile. "James was quite impressed with your thinking." As Diana walked away, I caught sight of Martin across the office, his expression darkening as he watched our interaction. He had clearly just received the same news, and he wasn't happy about it. I spent the next hour reviewing my key talking points and calming my nerves. This would be my first time being interviewed for a major publication, and the stakes felt incredibly high, both professionally and personally. At precisely noon, one of the production assistants came to escort me to the conference room. Martin was already there, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with James in the corner. When he saw me enter, he abruptly ended their discussion and approached me. "Remember, we need to present a unified front," he said quietly, echoing his words from our briefing session. "Follow my lead and keep your comments brief." Before I could respond, the interviewer, a sharp-looking woman named Eliza Wright, called us over to begin the segment. "We'll be discussing Horizon's expansion strategy," she explained as a makeup artist made last-minute touch-ups. "James tells me you two have developed an innovative approach to entering the East Coast market." Martin immediately stepped forward. "Yes, our team has been working on this strategy for several months. As marketing director, I've been guiding the overall vision while Rebecca has assisted with the research components." I felt a familiar surge of frustration, but kept my expression neutral. The cameras were rolling, and this wasn't the time for a confrontation. Eliza turned to me. "Rebecca, James mentioned you developed a particularly innovative approach for the Boston market. Can you tell us more about that?" This was my opportunity. I took a deep breath and launched into a concise explanation of my strategy, making sure to highlight the specific insights that had impressed James during our briefing. "What makes Boston unique is its concentration of educational institutions and biotech companies," I explained. "Rather than applying a one-size-fits-all approach, we've developed targeted messaging and partnership opportunities that speak directly to these sectors." "That sounds like a significant departure from how most software companies approach regional expansion," Eliza noted. Martin attempted to interject. "It builds on our established methodology, of course. We've always emphasized—" "Actually," James cut in smoothly, "what impressed me about Rebecca's approach is that it doesn't just build on our existing methodology. It reimagines it entirely. It's the kind of innovative thinking that has helped Horizon stay ahead of our competitors." The look on Martin's face was priceless, a mixture of surprise and barely concealed anger. I maintained my professional demeanor, but inside I felt a surge of vindication. "Rebecca, how did you develop this strategy?" Eliza asked, her attention now fully focused on me. For the next several minutes, I explained my research process and the insights that had shaped my recommendations. Martin tried several times to steer the conversation back to the team effort, but James and Eliza kept returning to my specific contributions. "What's next for this expansion strategy?" Eliza asked as the segment began to wrap up. "Implementation is key," I replied. "We're establishing our Boston office next month, with New York and D.C. to follow in the first quarter of next year. I'll be overseeing the marketing launch in each city, ensuring we adapt our approach to each unique market." This was technically true. I was supposed to be involved in the implementation, but I had intentionally emphasized my leadership role, something Martin had been trying to minimize. "That's ambitious," Eliza said. "James, you must be pleased with how the company is growing under Diana's leadership." As James responded, I caught Martin's eye. His expression was cold, but there was something else there too, a hint of respect, perhaps, or at least a recognition that I wasn't going to be as easily sidelined as he had thought. When the segment ended and the cameras stopped rolling, James approached me. "Excellent job, Rebecca. You represented Horizon perfectly." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by his approval. "I'm passionate about this strategy and excited to see it implemented." Speaking of implementation," James said, glancing briefly at Martin, who was speaking with the production crew. "I'd like you to take the lead on the Boston launch. You understand the market better than anyone else on the team." My eyes widened slightly. "I'd be honored, but that's currently under Martin's purview as marketing director." James smiled. "I've already discussed it with Diana. We both agree you're the right person for the job. Martin will continue to oversee the overall expansion, but you'll have autonomy for the Boston market. Consider it a test case for your approach." This was more than I had hoped for, a chance to prove my strategy in action, with the backing of both the founder and the CEO. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you down." As the crew began packing up their equipment, Martin finally approached me. His expression was carefully composed, but I could sense the tension radiating from him. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "You made quite an impression." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "I'm looking forward to working with you on the implementation phase." Martin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "James tells me you'll be taking point on Boston." "Yes, but I'll make sure to keep you in the loop on all major decisions," I assured him, extending an olive branch. Despite everything, we still had to work together. He nodded curtly before walking away, leaving me to wonder if this victory would improve our working relationship or only make it more complicated. As I gathered my notes and prepared to return to my desk, Diana caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Whatever happened next, I knew I had proven my value not just to myself, but to the people who mattered most at Horizon Tech. The Forbes article was published 3 weeks later, featuring a prominent section on Horizon's innovative approach to market expansion. My name appeared multiple times, with direct quotes about my strategy for Boston. The online version even included a short video clip from the interview, where James praised my reimagining of the company's methodology. The response was immediate. My LinkedIn profile was suddenly flooded with connection requests from industry professionals. I received emails from former colleagues congratulating me on the feature. Even my parents, who had never quite understood what I did for a living, called to say how proud they were to see my name in Forbes. But the most significant changes were happening within Horizon itself. The morning after the article was published, I arrived at the office to find a small crowd gathered around my desk. "There she is," Ryan from my team called out when he spotted me. "The marketing genius featured in Forbes." I laughed, slightly embarrassed by the attention. "Hardly a genius, just doing my job." "Don't be modest," Priya said, handing me a coffee. "This is a big deal. Forbes doesn't feature just anyone." As my colleagues dispersed, I noticed Diana walking toward me with a tall, elegant woman I didn't recognize. "Rebecca, I'd like you to meet Vanessa Roberts, our new Chief Marketing Officer," Diana said. "Vanessa, this is Rebecca Chen, the strategist behind our East Coast expansion." I shook Vanessa's hand, trying to hide my surprise. This was the first I'd heard about a CMO position being created. "Pleasure to meet you, Rebecca," Vanessa said warmly. "I read the Forbes piece. Your approach to the Boston market is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm looking forward to implementing it." "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," Diana interjected. "Vanessa will be overseeing all our marketing operations, including the East Coast expansion. Martin will be reporting to her going forward." The implications of this reorganization weren't lost on me. Martin was effectively being demoted, no longer reporting directly to the CEO. "We'd like you to head up the entire East Coast initiative," Vanessa continued. "Not just Boston, but New York and DC as well. You'll report directly to me, with a team of your own." I blinked, momentarily speechless. This was a significant promotion, essentially elevating me to the same level as Martin in the organizational hierarchy. "I'd be honored," I finally managed to say. "Thank you for the opportunity." "You've earned it," Diana said firmly. The board was extremely impressed with your strategy and your performance in the Forbes interview. We need more leaders who can articulate their vision the way you did. After Diana and Vanessa left, I sat at my desk, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a few weeks, I'd gone from being undermined by my manager to being recognized as a key strategic thinker within the company. It was vindicating, but also slightly overwhelming. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Martin approaching until he was standing beside my desk. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said, his tone difficult to read. "Diana just told me about the reorganization." "Thank you," I replied cautiously, unsure where this conversation was heading. Martin hesitated, seemingly struggling with what to say next. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, lowering his voice. "I haven't been fair to you these past few months." This was the last thing I had expected. "What do you mean?" He glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "When I took over as marketing director, I was under a lot of pressure to prove myself. You were clearly talented, with strong relationships across the company. I saw you as competition, I suppose." "So you deliberately undermined me?" I asked, keeping my tone even despite the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. "I wouldn't put it that way," Martin said, shifting uncomfortably. "But I didn't give your ideas the credit they deserved. I was focused on establishing my authority, and I made mistakes in how I handled things." It wasn't exactly a heartfelt apology, but it was more self-awareness than I had expected from him. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "We'll be working together under the new structure, so it's good to clear the air." Martin nodded. "For what it's worth, your strategy for Boston is solid. I should have recognized that sooner." With that, he walked away, leaving me with mixed emotions. Part of me was still angry about how he had treated me, but another part recognized that this was probably as close to an apology as Martin was capable of giving. Later that afternoon, Priya insisted on taking me out for a celebratory lunch. As we sat at our favorite cafe a few blocks from the office, she raised her iced tea in a toast. "To Rebecca Chen, marketing superstar and slayer of difficult bosses," she said with a grin. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "Hardly. I didn't get Martin fired." "No, but you got him demoted and yourself promoted, which is even better," Priya pointed out. "Now he has to see you succeed every day." "It's not about getting revenge," I said, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt. "It's about finally having my work recognized." "And it only took a national publication and the founder's personal intervention," Priya remarked dryly. "Totally normal career progression." We both laughed, but her comment made me reflect on the journey of the past few months. "You know, when Martin first started undermining me, I considered leaving Horizon," I admitted. "I even updated my resume and browsed job listings one weekend." "I'm glad you didn't," Priya said sincerely. "You belong here, Becca. You just needed the right people to see your value." "It taught me something important," I said, thinking about the lessons I'd learned. Sometimes doing good work isn't enough. You have to make sure the right people know about it. And sometimes you need to stand your ground when someone tries to take credit for your ideas," Priya added. "You didn't let Martin erase your contribution." She was right. If I hadn't insisted on joining that briefing with James, if I hadn't prepared that additional material on the Boston strategy, none of this would have happened. My work would have been presented as Martin's vision, and I would still be struggling to have my voice heard. The funny thing is, Martin actually apologized to me today, I told Priya, who nearly choked on her drink in surprise. "Are you serious? Martin Baker apologized? Did hell freeze over?" I smiled at her reaction. It wasn't exactly heartfelt, but he admitted he saw me as competition and didn't give my ideas the credit they deserved. "Well, that's something," Priya said, looking impressed despite herself. "Maybe there's hope for him yet." The following Monday, I moved into my new office, a small but private space with a window overlooking Elliott Bay. As I arranged my belongings, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past month. The situation with Martin had been frustrating and at times deeply demoralizing, but it had forced me to advocate for myself in ways I might not have otherwise. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. It was James Evans, looking casual in jeans and a Horizon Tech hoodie. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Of course," I replied, gesturing for him to come in. "What can I do for you?" James closed the door behind him and took a seat across from my desk. "I wanted to check in and see how you're settling into your new role." "It's been a bit of a whirlwind," I admitted, "but I'm excited about the opportunity." "Good," James nodded, "because I have another proposition for you. How would you feel about joining me for a speaking engagement at next month's Tech Innovation Summit in New York? I think your perspective on market-specific expansion strategies would be valuable." I was momentarily speechless. The Tech Innovation Summit was one of the industry's premier events, attended by executives from the biggest names in technology. "I'd be honored," I finally said. "Thank you for considering me." James smiled. "Don't thank me. You earned this through your own merit." I simply recognized it. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You know, when I founded Horizon, I made a promise to myself that I would build a company where good ideas could come from anywhere, and people would be recognized for their contributions, not their titles or how loud they spoke." "That's a wonderful philosophy," I said sincerely. "It doesn't always work out that way in practice," James acknowledged. "Office politics and human nature get in the way. But in your case, the system corrected itself. Your work spoke for itself, and the right people were listening." After James left, I turned to look out my window at the Seattle skyline. 6 months ago, I had been questioning my place at Horizon and whether I should continue fighting an uphill battle against a manager who seemed determined to diminish me. Now, I was heading up a major initiative, reporting to a new CMO, and preparing to speak alongside the founder at an industry event. The situation with Martin had been painful, but it had also been a crucible that forced me to stand up for myself and my work. In doing so, I had not only changed my own circumstances, but potentially made Horizon a better place for others facing similar challenges. As I opened my laptop to begin planning for the East Coast launch, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. This was where I was meant to be, doing work that mattered, with people who recognized my value. It hadn't been an easy journey, but as I looked toward the future, I knew it had been worth every difficult moment along the way.